Go lie down now.
Poor Milo.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to our live broadcast, our Q&A for the Calder Valley. Just to update you on what's happening with my office, all my team are still working from home, as according to government advice. That seems to be working quite well. We're still getting a high volume of emails in every day, and the team are dealing with those, as am I. And you can still call the office because the office is diverted to one of the team as well. So please feel free to carry on doing that. So how does this work? Well, quite a lot of people have emailed in questions. We've tried to group them together for to be a little bit succinct, and we'll work through them. So without further ado, the first question that we've received into the office is can you find out why, according to companies around here, they are having to sell PPE equipment they have made to overseas buyers? They reported on Look North last week that they aren't getting any response from government. There seems to be a lack of coordination in this area. And that's from Barbara. Well, Barbara, I can tell you that the government are working incredibly hard around the clock to secure the massive amount of PPE that's needed, not just for our local hospitals, but for care homes, for the police, for the fire, for our ambulance people, all our frontline workers who require PPE. The problem is the sheer quantity that's needed. I think you've probably heard on national TV that we have used well over 1 billion pieces of PPE in the last month. So the challenge is enormous. It's enormous on two fronts. The government's main aim is to get the big suppliers that can, to give you an example, we use 150,000 gowns a week just in the hospital system. So that needs massive suppliers. So the government are concentrating on those. And the other thing I would say as well is that it's a little bit disingenuous of the press to report shortages of PPE because there are hundreds of items of PPE. PPE just isn't one item. And do we have shortages of some items? Yes, we do. We currently have a shortage of gowns, for example. I will emphasise at this point that none of our local hospitals have actually run out of PPE, but on things like gowns, they are going from hand to mouth. So that's a national picture. So the government are concentrating very much on the large quantities of items they can get, not just from this country, but also from overseas. I, as you may have seen in the Yorkshire Post, have been calling on our local Resilience Forum and others. Now, the local Resilience Forum are the ones that distribute PPE out to non-medical frontline, so people like our police, our care homes and all those types of people. And basically, I've been calling on them to get MPs involved. We've got 54 MPs in Yorkshire and the Humber, all of which know our businesses. We visit businesses every week. We know what businesses are capable of. And I think we should be buying our PPE locally from local suppliers whenever we can. So that's currently where we are. I've been working very closely with our local council, our local resilience forum, and indeed nationally, to make sure that we get the PPE that we need. But that's why some of our local people are able to sell PPE overseas, because they're not the items that we currently have an issue with on a national scale. So I hope that puts some perspective into where we are with PPE locally as well. A question from Anthony. Why would you like to explain how Boris Johnson is allowed to go to his country residence, but we aren't allowed to visit our caravan out in the countryside? Which is quite an interesting question, really. But the thing with the Prime Minister is that, like all MPs, he lives and works in London for 4 or 5 days a week. His residence just so happens to be above number 11, and so that's his place of work. But his main home as Prime Minister is indeed Chequers, and that's why after he came out of hospital, and thankfully he did come out of hospital, and seems to be in a much better place and health than he was. He went to recoup his health in Chequers. So Chequers is his main home. That's why he went to Chequers to recuperate. This one's from Sharon. Hi Craig, I've heard that pubs and restaurants may not open until next year. Is this true? Well, I hope not, because like most of my constituents, I like visiting my local pubs and restaurants. And I've heard similar reports in the press as well. Look, that isn't true. It's not true in the sense that the government have announced that's the case. With all these things, the government will be assessing where we are in the cycle. They'll be taking scientific and medical advice to make any decisions that they take, and it will all be down to how we beat this disease and progress forward. I think we're in week 6. Like most people, I've forgotten what day it is, let alone how many weeks we've been in lockdown. But we all know that I think it's at the end of this week or the end of next week, the government will be reviewing where we'll end up and how we'll come out of lockdown. I suspect, I don't know, it's above my pay grade, because they will take into account the scientific evidence and the medical evidence. But I suspect it won't be just a case of, okay, today's the day we go back to normal. I think it'll be a gradual step. And I think where the initial question came from, I only suspect pubs and restaurants will be one of the last things we'll be allowed to do as we come out. But we need to watch this space and see what the advice is. I just saw Richard Langford's on the online currently, and he's got a question in there about funerals. And Richard says the council can't seem to get funerals right. The live stream for Grant's funeral failed partway through and was very upsetting. Can the government do more to make funerals possible? Well, let me just make this very, very clear. We have been fighting very, very hard. As some of you know, I have Howard Blackburrow and Sophie Whittaker, who are both councillors in the office, and they've been fighting very, very hard behind the scenes against this. This isn't a national government directive, but not just Calder, but other local authorities around West Yorkshire took the decision some weeks ago to not allow anybody to attend the crematorium for funerals, which was incredibly distressing. And I know, because we've had email exchanges with Richard, how distressing that has been for him and his family, and no doubt anybody in the same situation. Under pressure, they have reversed that a little bit, and they've now said, well, you can have up to 10 mourners, but only to the door, which to me just seems absolutely absurd. When in fact, if anything, it seems a little bit crass having some form of prayer or service at the door to the crematorium. So we are continuing to put pressure on our local authority about this, but that doesn't help Richard and families that have had to either have funerals without family there. And I know there are people around the Calder Valley already. I about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, got a very disturbing email from a lady that was clearly grieving from Sorby, and it was incredibly hard to read, listening to her thoughts about not being able to say goodbye to her I think it was her father, and basically her mum and dad were fit as fiddles, and then within 24 hours, the father got taken away, and that's the last time anybody in the family got to see her father again. Couldn't go to the funeral, couldn't participate in any form of service. And when families want some form of closure or want to start the grieving process, funerals are an incredibly big part of that, and it's incredibly important that that's allowed. So I do know Sophie and Howard, and of course myself, whenever I speak to the chief executive and the leader of the council, we do push back very strongly on the provisions there. They come back and say, of course, is that because they have to totally disinfect the crematorium after each service, they wouldn't be able to cremate as many people in a day as they need to. And they also quote the health and well-being of the staff. I still think there is more they can do, and I can tell you, Richard and whoever else this has affected over the last few weeks, we will continue to keep pushing back on that. So thank you, Richard, for your question. There was a question on my sheet here from somebody else as well, and when I get to it, I'll make sure that I mention them as well. I've got a question here from Dale. Dale asks, can you explain what support is available to businesses and how to apply? There's been a lot of information announced over the past few weeks, and it's all a bit of a minefield. Well, Dale, you're absolutely right. And there are some criteria around some of the stuff as well. So let me see if I can put some of this in perspective. The first thing I'd mention, excuse me, is the government grants that are currently going out through our local authority. Just so you know, there are two forms of grants. There is the first one is a £10,000 grant, and that is for any business in regards to those that pay business rates. So if you pay business rates, even if you get the small business rate relief and you don't pay anything currently, because you have a business rate account, you are entitled to that £10,000 grant. If you haven't applied already, then you need to make sure that you are applying for that loan, because this loan and the £25,000 loan, the government have given Calderdale Council £65 million to distribute out, and as of on Friday just gone, they'd only allocated out £45 million. So there are people out there that still haven't applied. You can apply online. It's very straightforward. You just need your business rates account number and your bank account details. Fill that in online at Calderdale Council under the business support page, and they will let you know within a short period of time whether you have been successful. They obviously have to do some checks so there's no fraud there, and within 24 hours of receiving that email from Calderdale, you get the £10,000 in there as well. If you are a pub or restaurant or leisure type industry that has a rateable value over £15,001 up to £51,000, you can apply for the £25,000 grant. Now the criteria around that is quite strict. You literally have to be a pub or a restaurant, for example. What you can't be is somebody that supplies that pub or restaurant. So just check the criteria on each of those grants before you do so. Now, on top of that, of course, everybody's heard about furloughing and everybody's heard about the self-employed business schemes. So they're fairly well available to most people. I'll go into the self-employed bit because I do know we have a question on that a bit later on. But the thing with furlough is that you can go and get another job. What you can't do is furlough then do some work for the same company. You'll have seen that places like Tesco's, Sainsbury's, Aldi, all those major supermarkets are taking lots and lots of people on. So people are being furloughed and going to do some extra work as well, or volunteering work. There's lots of opportunity in the third sector as well. On top of those two measures, we have the business interruption loans. Now, there's been a bit of controversy around these because some people are saying that the banks aren't playing ball. There has been some slight changes to the criteria on those, but they're available through your bank. They are 80% guaranteed by government, and on top of that, they are interest-free for a year. You do have to prove that you are a viable business, and I don't mean a viable business now. I mean going into this crisis, you were indeed a viable business. But apply through your bank. Generally, if you have a relationship manager at your bank, that's the person to contact. If you don't have a relationship manager, then apply online. Some of you will also know for the smaller businesses, the government announced yesterday that they are doing these bounce back loans. Now, these are great loans for small businesses. The criteria on that is that you can apply for up to 25% of your annual turnover to a maximum of £50,000. They are interest-free for a year, and they're 100% backed by government too. They start next Monday from 9 o'clock. You can contact your bank, and they should be available as well. A couple of other things, VAT deferments available for business as well, so my advice to businesses would be very much to have a look at how you sit in each of those criterias. So I hope that puts a little bit of meat on the bone for you there, Dale. The next question is from John, and John says the public urgently needs access to testing facilities, which is being done. What is being done about this? Well, as you will have seen, there's been a little bit of controversy about this over the last week. Excuse me, but the government is now allowing all essential workers in England and members of their household that is showing symptoms of coronavirus to go and be tested. We in Calder have a test centre in Halifax, and there are others around Yorkshire as well. The armed forces are also doing something like 100 it was over 100 mobile testing stations as well. You can book those online every day. Now, the reason you can only book them daily is because of capacity at the labs and capacity of physical tests at this particular moment in time. So you can book online, go to your chosen testing station and have your test. And of course, if you are coronavirus free and you're an essential worker, that means when you are feeling better, you can clearly go back to work without having to isolate as well. So that's important, and if you stay tuned for more testing, as you can see, we've seen a massively increased amount of tests being done on a daily basis. The next question is from Paul, and this is about the self-employed, and this is why I didn't go into too much detail about the self-employed salary scheme. And Paul says, I'm self-employed and pay myself a basic salary on PAYE. I rely on dividends from my businesses to provide for my family, but I fall through the gaps and not claim for anything. What is the government doing to sort people like me? Well, the problem, Paul falls into the category of about 5% of people where they are falling through the gap. What I will say is that these schemes, the furloughing scheme and the self-employed scheme, which the government have announced, they literally put together in days where normally the government machinery would take many months, if not over a year, to put together. So credit to the Chancellor. I think personally the Chancellor's doing a sterling job. He is very open and transparent. He is taking feedback from people like me on a daily basis, but not just me. All the 649 other MPs are feeding in as well. And Paul's case is one that the Chancellor is very much aware about. The problem with this particular scheme, or this way you pay yourself, so generally somebody like Paul would pay themselves about £12,500 on PAYE to get the tax-free allowance. They then pay themselves in dividends. And this is where the problem is. You can furlough yourself on the £12,500, so you are entitled to furlough. But what you're not entitled to is the income from dividends. And the reason for that currently is because the Treasury have no way of deciphering who pays themselves in this way and which are large corporate companies that take an income from investments on the stock market. So they are working feverishly at trying to come up with a solution on this, but as it currently stands, that's the reason why dividends aren't taken as part of the self-employed scheme, is because the Treasury have no way of deciphering which are the large corporate companies that take an income from the stock market compared to those small people or small businesses, I should say, that pay themselves in the dividend. But like I say, the Chancellor is very much well aware of this, and they are looking at schemes. Now, I can't say to you, hand on heart, whether there will be a solution to this, but I can tell you that they're very much aware of it. Other things that are available to you, Paul, are things like the business interruption loans. You can apply for those. Depending on the size of your business, again, those bounce back loans that were announced yesterday are probably a better solution for the small businesses. There are business grants if you pay business rates, the option to defer VAT payments, and you may also be eligible for a universal credit as well. And I will say just on that we've had some terrific feedback from people who've been using the universal credit system. I know initially there was huge amounts of numbers of people trying to use it, but that seems to have settled down, and the system does seem to be working quite well. Okay. This one's about Parkwood Crematorium, which I think we've covered off simply with Richard a little bit earlier on. So I'll go on to this. Hi Craig, I live near Batings Dam in Ripponden and I walk around it for my prescribed daily exercise. Other people are also walking around the water as it's a lovely spot to do so. However, I have seen the police leaving notes on people's cars who have obviously driven to work around. Can you clarify the rules around driving to a beauty spot to exercise? Well, the rules are actually quite clear. If you live near Batings Dam and you can walk to it as part of the process, then by all means go to Batings Dam. The rules very clearly say that if you can exercise, can go for your daily walk around the area that you are, then please do so. No more than an hour a day. Make sure you're social distancing when you can. No, I'll take that back. You should be social distancing whilst you're out. I know when I'm walking around here at home in Brighouse, when I take Milo out for a walk every day, people are very good at either crossing the road when somebody's coming towards them, and even up on the field where I take Milo. Again, there is lots of social distancing going on as well. So wherever you can, do that where you are able to. If you live in a high-rise flat, for example, in the centre of town, and there is no parks or areas for you to get there and back and have a decent walk around a park within the hour, then by all means be sensible. You can use your car, but the thing is to make sure that you're out of the house no more than an hour each time. So yes, you can go to Batings Dam, and I will say about the police have been very, very good. I do speak to our police and crime commissioner on a regular basis, in fact, a conference call for the last 2 weeks, and an update on what's happening with the police. And they are taking a fairly robust approach and cautioning people. And on some occasions, unfortunately, they've had to fine people as well. But on the whole, there are many, many more police out making sure and breaking people up when they are ignoring the social distancing rules. And I think the police are doing a tremendous job, not just locally, but across West Yorkshire as well. Here's another one about a job, and this one's from Amy, but I know we've had quite a lot of communication with Anthony as well about this. And Amy says, I resigned my old job, after the 19th of March, after securing a new one, and was due to start on April the 7th, which has now been put back. I therefore miss out on being furloughed. Is there anything I can do, or am I unfortunate enough to fall through the gap of support? Well, what I would say to you, Amy, is this. If you left on the 19th of March, I think the cut-off is for payroll on your new job is the 18th of March, where you're entitled to be furloughed. So you can't be furloughed from your new job, even though they've put off the start date. But what you can do is you can go back to your old employer and ask them if they would consider furloughing you as part of their scheme as well. Now, I know that seems a little bit mad because you've left a job to start a new job, but don't underestimate how many people have gone back to their old employer and they've been good enough to put them on the furlough. A very high proportion of the people that we've spoken to over the last few weeks have very much gone down that route, and that's been helpful. Just another one on that. If you remember, the government have changed the date for furloughing from the 28th of February to, I think it's the 17th or 18th of March. There is another bit of a unintended consequence in there as well. The criteria is actually that you're on the payroll and have been your company has notified HMRC by that date. So if you are a monthly, so I know Anthony, for example, started on the 1st of March. He doesn't get paid till the end of the month, and his company won't notify HMRC until about the week before the end of the month. They've actually missed the cut-off as well. So that's an issue. But I can assure you that the Chancellor is very much aware, and things like that we are feeding in to see whether there's a quick fix to help people like Amy and Anthony as well. This one's from Linda, and we've had a few of these questions in about our borders. And the question is, why have we not closed our borders like other countries? Surely this would go a long way to stopping the spread of the virus. It seems unfair that we all have to stay at home when we're allowing people to still enter the UK without testing on arrival. So, Linda, you're absolutely right to be concerned about this one, because it does seem a bit of a crazy message. Excuse me. But I can tell you, excuse me, there are two things from this. First of all, most airlines, when you get on them in another country, and I know this because we've been dealing with quite a number, dozens in fact, of our constituents from the Calder Valley that have been stuck overseas. A lot of the airlines have been insisting on a fit-to-fly certificate from a doctor before you get on the plane. We can argue about how thorough that test is, but the reality is the airlines that are flying these people are insisting on that, so they have a fit to fly. But more to the point, our chief medical officer, as he said last week, that there is no evidence to suggest that interventions like closing borders or travel bans would have any effect on the spread of the virus. Providing people are social distancing, which are the rules we have in this country when we're here, there is no reason, according to the chief, I'm going to say it is medical officer, that there is no medical evidence to say that by testing people is going to make any difference whatsoever. A little bit above my pay grade in regards to science and medical evidence, I'm afraid. From Daniel, I have friends who are stuck in Poland, unable to get home because they are in lockdown. Why aren't the government sending over flights to return UK citizens? Well, interestingly enough, our government have been very clear from the outset, and I think it's about 3 weeks ago now. The Foreign Secretary he asked the question. Dominic Raab very clearly put a considerable amount of money for repatriation flights. On top of that, what they also did was that they negotiated with airlines and countries in places where they'd stop transit passengers. So Singapore, for example, we had quite a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand couldn't get home because Singapore and the United Arab Emirates had closed transit provision for airlines. They negotiated so that the airlines were allowed to do that where they were repatriating British nationals. So that was the first thing. So on the back of that, the government said that where there were commercial flight options like that, they wouldn't send repatriation flights or charter flights that the British government pays for. Obviously, the situation around the world has changed by the day, and when that facility has dried up, we have indeed sent repatriation flights. I suspect, being in Poland, there are other ways of getting back. I've been dealing with quite a few people stuck down in Spain. There are still road routes out of there, so that's another reason why they wouldn't particularly send a repatriation flight. But the latest ones we did were to Bangladesh last week, and we've done repatriation flights to Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, Peru. We had one of our, probably more, but one that we know about that was stuck in Peru, and other places as well. So those repatriation flights do happen, but they only happen when there is no commercial option to get home. And my advice to anybody, if you're watching this and you are stuck overseas still, if there are commercial options, please don't think that the British government are going to send over some charter planes. They won't when there are commercial options to get home. So if there are commercial options, then please get yourself to safety and come home if indeed that's what you decide to do. This is a really important one, and one that we've been quite close to. Hi Craig, my 89-year-old mother lives on her own after my father died a few years ago. She does not have technology apart from the TV, and feels extremely isolated and lonely. I speak to her every day on the phone, but it saddens me so much to know that she feels lonely and I cannot physically be there to comfort her. What can I do to help stave off loneliness without the use of technology? Well, this is where it's incredibly important that we really step up to the mark. I know I've lived here in Brighouse, this house, for many years, and there are neighbours around here that you kind of wave to that I don't know incredibly well. Go knock on their doors. Go and make sure they're okay. You don't have to physically be in the face. You can knock on the door and stand back. Myself and my whole team have a list of elderly people that we go shopping for on a weekly basis, whether we go and collect their prescriptions. We also pick up the phone and talk to several people a day, just checking they're okay, just letting them have a bit of a chat, bearing in mind that phone call, that knock on the door, that conversation through the window is probably the only social interaction somebody has in the whole day. So important that we do that on a individual basis, not just for our family, but also our friends, but also our neighbours too. Don't think that just because they look okay and in your head they're perceived to be okay, that they're not going to be lonely, because I know an example of a single mom with two very young children, for example, who has been at home. She's been trying to work from home whilst looking after her two young children. Thankfully, she's now been furloughed, so she doesn't have to do that. But things like shopping, having that conversation, FaceTiming if there is technology there, but go knock on that window as well. That's incredibly important to do. I'll also mention that if you are concerned about somebody that is in that situation, the loneliness charities like Age UK do some fantastic stuff around support. And Let's Talk Loneliness public campaign, it's been rolled out to get people talking as well. So all that kind of stuff is incredibly important. If I've got a helper here, can I, Soph? Can you just get my phone charger, please? My phone's about to run out. It's in that bottom corner. Thank you. So yes, very, very important, as is domestic and sexual violence. Don't underestimate how... If those of you that hate going and spending family Christmases together for a day, think about how it must feel for somebody that's in lockdown with an abusive partner, whether that's physically or sexually abusing, then think how horrendous that must be. Now, luckily, locally, we do speak to our local police quite frequently, and instances of reported, and I emphasise reported, things like sexual and domestic abuse are about normal, if there is such thing as normality. My guess is that there isn't a rise in reported because people are locked down. So just be very much aware of that, and if people need to get out, make sure that we're helping them in those situations as well. Very, very important. There is a question on here from Vardhan Jain. I don't know whether that's your real name, but it says travel companies are refusing to offer customer refunds, instead offering travel vouchers, which are not covered by ABTA or at all. So should the companies go into liquidation, customers will lose their, sorry, I'm plugging in my charger, lose their, actually I'm going to have to change that way around. Sorry, let me see if I can balance the phone there. Let's see what I can do here. Sorry. Give me 2 seconds. I'll just have to hold it. So back to those travel companies that are refusing to offer customer refunds. We have a law in this company, and it's the consumer rights law. And if you give me 2 ticks, our aviation minister, Joe Churchill, sent out a reminder to MPs. I think it was only this morning. Let me see if I can get that up for you, which I probably can't because I've got the live chat somewhere. So there is a if you email me, I will get you the exact ruling in this country that insists that if a customer requires a refund, then they are entitled to refund. Now, what I will say to you is, of course, you know, the travel industry have been inundated over the course of the last few weeks with cancelled airlines. So people trying to decide what they want to do. Elaine and I were supposed to be away over Easter as well, so I know exactly the type of problem that has been raised by Jane. By all means, if you are being offered a voucher or a rebooking of date from an airline, and that is suitable to yourselves, then by all means take that offer. So that's absolutely fine. However, if you're in a position like Elaine and I, who don't know when we're going to get the opportunity, because we both work, whether we can get the same time off, and all those other things that go to it as well. And now we're in this pandemic. Some people may think, well, okay, I've got job insecurity going forward. How do I? We're probably better off cashing in. You can, and are right. It is right for you, and you can legally request a refund, and they cannot say no to you. The only thing that I would say to you is that in some instances, because of the cash flow issues, those refunds are taking up to 90 days. But don't be fobbed off by airline industry, whether it's a travel agent. The online travel agents seem to be by far the worst. Apodo is a company that I tried to get some of our constituents back some weeks ago, and you can't phone them, you can't email them, you can't. They have this stupid bot system that eventually tells you that there's nobody that speaks English. So all those types of companies are an absolute nightmare to deal with. But stick to your guns, insist on a refund. You are entitled to a refund if indeed that's what you want. But what I would say to you is, I do know we dealt with one family in the Calder Valley that had booked with Emirates Airlines. They had booked a 2-week holiday. Emirates said to them that they could rebook to wherever within that region they wanted to, with no additional fees or indeed upgrade feeds if needed for a different time of year. They've actually done that, rebooked going away at Christmas. And if anybody's ever been away at Christmas, it's normally an incredibly expensive time. So from that point of view, they've done quite well out of it. So have a look at what your airline is offering first. If you are able to obviously reschedule, then I see Varden Jane says it's Expedia. Keep at them. They have no right to refuse you a refund. So say, no, I do not want a voucher, I want a refund. And if it's going to take me 90 days to get the refund back, I want my refund back. Basically, that's it. Okay, let me just go back to some more of the questions. I'm sorry about the jerkiness of the camera. My phone was about to run out and I had to plug it in, and now I've got to hold it. So my apologies. Okay, this is another issue that we've dealt with a few times over the last few weeks. This is from a lady called Julie. Hi Craig, I have COPD and diabetes and cannot get an online delivery slot with the supermarkets for love nor money. I have not received a letter from the NHS to say that I have to isolate for 12 weeks, yet I feel that I am at high risk to catching this virus. Can somebody help me? Well, Julie, you and anybody else in this position can actually self-register. If you Google, if you're in that position to do so, or to do so on behalf of somebody, you can register with the government. They will ask you what type of help you think you need. So, for example, if you're at home and you have no access to family, a lot of family live away, and you're in this position, the government are doing food parcels, and they can arrange for things like medication and give you priority slots on online shopping as well. I saw Tesco's this morning and now doing 1 million online shops a week, which is pretty good. But if you self-register on the government website, that will give you a number. So when you call Tesco's or Sainsbury's or one of the large supermarket chains around here, it's Morrison's, who are fabulous with our elderly people around here. You get that number, and that will register you for a weekly shopping slot. So that's important as well. Sophie says that we're going to register the website on here for you to register. But you can, if you don't have access to things like the internet, you can call on 0800 028 8327. That's 0800 028 8327, and you can register online. You can register with the government organisation that arranges that via telephone if you need to. Okay. Hi Craig, I live in a flat in Elland and see groups of people meeting up together and clearly ignoring the social distancing rules. These people are the ones who are going to spread the virus through ignorance or lack of regard for guidance that we all must follow. What are the government doing about those who blatantly ignoring the lockdown? Well, this is a little bit similar to the one earlier about Bating's Dam. This one's from James. So, as I previously mentioned, James, the police are out in very high numbers enforcing the lockdown, dispersing people when they are gathering in groups, and in particular I hear that young people tend to be the biggest offenders of this when they're getting together. But if you have any concerns whatsoever in regards to groups of people that are consistently ignoring the rules on lockdown, then basically dial 101 with the police. It's that simple. This kind of ties in with Graham Collinson's just left a message on there. He's asking, what are your thoughts on the amount of people out and about and the reopening of more and more shops while still a lockdown in place? And the one that I'll read is from Graham. I don't know if this is the same Graham, but dear Mr. Whittaker, it's been 6 weeks now since the lockdown measures were imposed upon the nation. How much longer are they going on for? And I fear for the state of our economy and people's livelihoods. So to answer both of those things together, I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. 6 weeks is a long time. I think I mentioned earlier, I don't even know what day it is, let alone how many weeks we've been on lockdown. But it all depends on the advice from the scientific experts and the medical experts. It appears as though we've gone through the peak of deaths and infections in this country. But those people, those being the scientists and the medical professionals, will be the ones that will advise government on when the best time is to start lifting some of the lockdown measures. Now, I can't tell you whether that's going to start from next week. I can't even tell you what that's going to look like. And I fully understand why the government would not yet want to share what their coming out of lockdown plan looks like, because the last thing we want is a very mixed message going out. So I support that. I know some people don't, but I absolutely support the government's stance on this, that when we're in a position to start lifting restrictions, then that's the way it should be. Now, just to directly answer Graham Collinson's thoughts about the reopening of more and more shops. Basically, when you talk about places like B&Q and Wickes, they were never forced to close in the first place. Those companies decided that they would do that. If you remember, the actual advice to everybody is that where you can work from home, then you must. But if you can't work from home, providing you're imposing and able to work within the social distancing guidelines, then you can go out to work. The building industry was a good example of a sector where they continue to work. But of course, the reason why places like B&Q and Wickes were not involved in they were excluded from those businesses having to shut, was because, of course, if you're going to have builders and people like that who are having to work, then they're going to have the raw materials to go out and build. So B&Q and places like Wickes, B&Q, the hardware stores were never mandated to close in the first place anyway. So that's the answer directly to Graham's question. Question here from Nick. He says, "Hi Craig, just a quick question. Does a company have to furlough its staff?" No, they don't. And in fact, it's not mandatory for companies to have to furlough staff. The idea of the furloughing program is that to help companies maintain skill sets within their businesses. So a lot of our businesses fallen off a cliff. Under normal circumstances, they would probably lay people off, make them redundant. Furloughing scheme is there very much to help businesses so they don't have to do that. But at the end of the day, a business needs to make the decision whether they need to furlough people or not. That's not a government mandatory direction. That is an opportunity there for a business to maintain skill set, to maintain jobs, and keep the businesses going when we come out of this, rather than having to lay people off and then rehire if indeed that business starts up after the I'm sorry, I was just reading the next question. So there we go. This is one from Dan. Dan, hi Craig, I'm a self-employed tradesman and work has naturally dropped off a cliff during this pandemic. I believe I qualify for the self-employed income scheme, but I've read that won't be available until the beginning of June. It seems I'm not eligible for universal credit to keep me going in the meantime because I have too much savings, which I had earmarked for my wedding later this year. Is there any help that is available to me right now? Well, first of all, Dan, it is fair to say that you're absolutely right. The scheme doesn't start till June, and a little bit like the furlough scheme that started this month, which has gone incredibly well, by the way. That won't be available for another month. But you can apply for these bounce back loans, which are available from Monday for small businesses, or indeed you can apply for the company interruption loans as well, available from your bank. And of course, if you do pay VAT, then you're entitled to defer payment for a little while as well. So a couple of things, not directly helping you here and now, but may save you having to limp by from friends, family, and bank of mum and dad, etc. over the next month. I would apply for universal credit anyway, because there are some instances, if you can prove, for example, that money saved is for your wedding, they may look at that favourably. I know they're doing that when you have money put aside to pay for future tax commitments, for example. So apply and see what happens, but just make sure that you are very clear about what that money's set aside for. They may ask you to provide some evidence to say that that's why you've got the money, that's what I would do. I would try the universal credit route as well. Right. Let me have a look here. Let's take a couple of questions off here. One here from Steve. Hi, Steve. I hope you're well. Hope your lovely wife is well as well. Asking about antisocial behaviour taking place. Who think they can do what they want. I think we've covered this earlier on. 101, the police are very quick to respond to this and are doing a tremendous job locally here in Brickhouse, as they are right across the Calder Valley and indeed West Yorkshire. Right, Ben Pearce, what are your thoughts on the ultimate damnation by the House of Lords on the extension of the off-payroll reforms into private sector? Well, I think I've fairly well covered that in our previous communication, Ben. What I would say to you is that what these government schemes have highlighted very, very clearly is there are sectors out there that are. You're talking about what they call IR35. There are sectors out there that are claiming to be self-employed, but are still working at the same place for. I'm not talking about a 6-month contract here. I'm talking about a long period of time. So I dare say the government will look at this very, very clearly, because those sectors that have been lobbying people like myself and indeed Treasury is highlighting how much abuse there is of the IR35 system currently in the private sector. And I know, because we've had the communication in the past, that there are some unintended consequences of this. But I dare say the government will be putting much more thought into this process, but looking also very clearly at the very clear abuse of IR35 as well. The final thing I'll say, Ben, is you will have seen that they've put this off for another year anyway because of the pandemic. Alex Williamson asks, what are your thoughts on the fact that the law now allows women to get abortion medication without a face-to-face meeting with a GP? I'm incredibly uncomfortable with this. Really, really uncomfortable with this. Now, before everybody jumps down my throat and says, "Well, it's my body, it's my right," and if you take a trip into Halifax to one of the crisis centres there that deals with counselling for women that have had abortions, you will see very clearly the psychological and mental health issues that a lot of women experience by having an abortion with what they now feel is not the right advice at the time. So I'm very, very uncomfortable about this. I will be pressing ministers and secretaries of state to make sure that we revert back very quickly after this pandemic, where they need to be offered counselling and also be offered very strong advice from two GPs. So the direct the direct answer to your question, Alex, is that I feel very, very uncomfortable about this on a whole different level, and on many levels as well. So I personally, as an MP, will be pushing government to make sure that the current, not the current practices, but the practices that are currently law in this country are put back straight away. Right, let's see, what else have we got? Alex, like I say I'm ignoring your question. No, not ignoring your question at all. I think I've just answered it. It's just that there are many questions on here, and I only see a question when I scroll through the ones that I've got here as well. Okay, I'm just conscious of time now because we've been going for over an hour. So I'll finish on this final one from a Brighouse resident called Barbara. Barbara asked, I would like to know when the tip may open. Lots of fly tipping going on. Just heard on the radio that France may start a booking system which allows you to take your rubbish at allotted times. Seems to be a good idea. Barbara, absolutely on board with this one. I can't imagine how much rubbish people have got with the time they've had on their hands, good weather, working in the gardens, itching to go to the tip. What a great opportunity for those unscrupulous people to go and fly tip. I've had this conversation with our chief executive at Calder. Again, he quotes safety of staff and, but the reality is there is no reason why we cannot, in my view, have our recycling tips reopened, providing we do it on a booking slot. But the last thing we want is queues going for miles for people to get rid of some of the rubbish and recycling. But very much, I think that should be happen. I and your two councillors that work in my office, Howard and Sophie, will make sure that we are pushing the council to make those happen. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I need to go and have a nice drink because my throat's a bit dry. I hope you found today a little bit informative. I apologise about the shaky camera. When we do it next week, we'll do it again next Tuesday between 3 and 4. So email in your questions to my parliamentary email account. That's craig.whittaker.mp@parliament.uk. Just Google it if that was too quick for you. So send in a question, or indeed we will advertise it on Facebook like we've just done this week. And if you want to ask a question, then please submit your question. So that's it. Have a great week. Don't forget, stay at home, stay safe, protect our NHS. And if you saw some of the emails that me and the team are dealing with from those that have lost people, you would absolutely realise how important staying at home, self-isolating and staying safe is, because the grief and the agony that some families are experiencing when they've lost loved ones presently is unbearable. Have a good week. Speak to you next week.